Shalom, dear friends. My name is Brad Boxman, one of the many disciples of Rabbi Henry Cohen. May his memory forever be a blessing. I'm unable to be with you this afternoon, regrettably, as I am still in mourning for my own father, Edward Boxman, who passed away just a few weeks ago. And so while I'm still in Shloshim, I can intimately feel the pain that you all feel, especially Shelley and Lisa and Tali and the entire Cohen family and the Beth David family. So please know my prayers are with you, even though I'm not with you physically. And so while I am still mourning my biological father, I was saddened to learn, of course, that my spiritual father, Rabbi Cohen, who has been my spiritual father for more than 50 years, has passed into eternity. And like we all know with our own parents, the time will eventually come. So it is with those we love who have influenced us so greatly. We know the time will come for them as well. For even Moses and Aaron were mere mortals. I met Rabbi Cohen for the first time when I was 9 years old, when I was in the 4th grade, when my parents made the choice to move from Mainline Reformed Temple to Beth David in Winfield, because they wanted a smaller, more intimate synagogue. I remember somehow vaguely in my memory meeting Rabbi Cohen for the first time in his office, again a young lad of about 9 years old, and shaking his hand. Little did I know then that this man would help determine not only my career choice for the rest of my life, but he would shape my existence as a person and as a Jew for the remainder of my life. So using quotes from the Mishnah, from rabbinic maxims from Pirkei Avot, allow me to share some memories that I have and to be able to lift up Rabbi Cohen's memory and to honor his legacy of learning and of love, of service and of social justice that he leaves behind. First, we have a statement that says, Hamidu Tamidim Harbe, that we are commanded to raise up many disciples, students. There are many who have been influenced by Rabbi Cohen to enter the rabbinate or other positions of Jewish leadership, including cantors and teachers and lay leaders. So fortunate are we all to have been able to live in his presence. In my case, I think of him as the rabbi who presided at my bar mitzvah in 1973, at my confirmation in 1976, and then giving me the opportunity at the age of 16 to teach in the Samuel K. Markowitz Religious School, where I taught for about 4 years. He helped me to learn, to teach. He taught me for the first time what it meant to understand the prophets of Israel, how to understand the importance of the state of Israel, modern Jewish history, and Bible stories. He told me that he kept moving me up each year from 5th grade to 6th grade to 7th grade to 8th grade to 9th grade so that I would be able to teach his own daughters. I grew up listening, as many of us did, to the wonderful stories about Charlie Bronstein and Linus and Lucy and Schroeder. But amidst all of that, I also learned about Martin Buber and civil rights and racial justice and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I can tell you there aren't too many 11-year-olds that could tell you about I, thou, and Martin Buber's philosophy. Then, of course, I was influenced by one of his great books, Why Judaism, a book that teaches his philosophy of Judaism and what it means to be a Jew in the 20th century. I used it for many years in my rabbinate as I used it to teach others. And I've even prepared before knowing of this, and still will now, to use it as a pretext for one of my high holiday sermons that I'm planning for this coming year. Of course, I also grew up learning firsthand about the other Rabbi Henry Cohen of Galveston, Rabbi Cohen's grandfather, a giant of a rabbi who clearly influenced his namesake, his own grandson, Henry Cohen of Philadelphia. There are so many stories about Henry Cohen, the elder that I remember Rabbi Cohen telling about his grandfather, I remember the story of the sleeves, where he would tell about how his grandfather would mark up his sleeves each day to tell what his itinerary was for that day. He would write in marker or pen on the end of his sleeves what his agenda would be. I remember the story of the Boilermaker. That was the non-Jewish man who was trying to enter the United States during a period of immigration and was denied entry. And Rabbi Cohen went to Washington, D.C. and was able to have an appearance with the President of the United States. And there he asked for the Boilermaker and his family to be admitted into the United States. And when the President said, "I'm so amazed at you Jews that you care so much about your own people that you would come all the way from Galveston to D.C. to plead on their behalf. I'm just so admiring of what you all do for one another." And Rabbi Cohen replied, "But sir, he's not Jewish." And even all the more, it showed where Rabbi Cohen, my rabbi, received his love of all humanity. And of course, how he worked in the aftermath of the horrific and devastating hurricane in Galveston that took so many lives, and how he was the healer. So I heard all these stories from the mouth of my rabbi about his grandfather. But another phrase from the Mishnah teaches us, "Be of the disciples of Aaron, Ohev Shalom v'rodef Shalom," loving peace and pursuing peace. Rabbi Cohen, my rabbi, taught me empathy and openness to the pain and suffering of others. He was so open to the understanding of the pain of the conflict between Arabs and Jews and the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. I remember one story he told about sitting in Israel around a campfire with Arabs and Jews trying to talk to one another, to understand each other's narrative, to understand the pain and suffering of the other. And I remember him telling the story that instead of singing the words to Oseh Shalom, and we get to the phrase Ya'aseh Shalom, he said, "Why don't we change the words to Na'aseh Shalom? Instead of let him, God, make peace in the high heavens, may it be let us make peace together, Na'aseh Shalom." And I remember the words inscribed on the bima at Beth David Reformed Congregation that sat on the bima, that were on the bima behind Rabbi Cohen, that said, "Bakei Shalom v'ratfehu," seek peace and pursue it. This was at the heart of Rabbi Cohen's calling. But also at the heart of his calling is the phrase, "Tzedek, tzedek tirdof," justice, justice you shall pursue. I know that he was one who stood with those who were persecuted and oppressed, the Black Americans among us. I remember how he tried to pursue in the best way and succeeded in many ways to creating good relations with the black community in Winfield. I remember how he stood steadfast in not wanting to leave Winfield to go to the suburbs because he didn't want to abandon the relationships that he made in Winfield. I remember how he spoke passionately about civil rights and racial justice. And I remember as a young boy going with my parents on a Sunday morning, or actually a few Sunday mornings, to meet with black neighbors in Winfield as Jews and blacks getting to know one another over brunch. I remember sitting in one person's kitchen and hearing them tell about their stories of oppression from their stories of their ancestors, and being able with them to hear and learn about Jews. Rabbi Cohen not only taught about racial justice, he helped to make it better by creating relationships of meaning and worth between people of different backgrounds. I remember when Beth David Reformed Congregation helped Vietnamese boat refugees that were coming to our shores with no one to take them in. And I remember how Beth David opened its doors and allowed them to sleep in the synagogue and gave them showers and gave them opportunities to find employment and gave them food and helped them get on their feet. This was Rabbi Cohen at his best. I remember him teaching about homelessness and fair housing and criminal justice reform. Rabbi Cohen, the giant of social justice, is one who influences me still. And then we have a phrase in the Mishnah that says, "Kanei lecha chaver, aseh lecha rav." One should acquire for oneself a friend, and one should acquire for oneself a rabbi, a teacher. Well, a rabbi is also a healer, and Rabbi Cohen was a healer to my family. He was with me and my family at some of our roughest and toughest times. I was extremely close with my grandpa, my pop-up Al, and when he passed away, my mother didn't know how to tell me. And so I remember waking up one morning and hearing Rabbi Cohen's voice downstairs as I was still in my pajamas in bed. I came downstairs and there was Rabbi Cohen, the first to tell me that my grandpa, my pop-up, had passed away. He came to be with me early in the morning to soften my sorrow. And he, of course, officiated at my pop-up's funeral and then again at my bubby's funeral, helping us walk through the valley of the shadow, being there as my rabbi in tough times, sad times. But it was also there at joyful times for me as he installed me in my first pulpit in Indianapolis Hebrew congregation in 1986, and then again in my pulpit in St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands in 1990. And I remember how he and Edna came and we went over to St. John and spent the day at the beach and had so much time exploring the island. But I remember in 1986 at my installation in Indianapolis how he referred back to a sermon that he had given on my bar mitzvah 13 years earlier. He said, "It's good, Rabbi, to keep notes from what you preach," because he looked back and saw my Torah portion was Shabbat Naso, the Torah portion that speaks about the Nazarite. The Nazarite is the one who dedicates oneself to the service of God, takes a vow to do so. And then he looked at me and he said, "Brad, I never thought you'd take me so seriously." Rabbi Cohen was my mentor. He was the one who, even up until the last few years, would read over my high holiday sermons and share some of his comments. And he's the one who gave me the opportunity to give my first ever sermon before I even went to rabbinic school. In February of 1981, he let me preach in the pulpit as he went away to give some speech at Champaign-Urbana. And he allowed me to give my first sermon ever from the pulpit that I grew up in. The name of my sermon was Ze Eli. I still remember, "This is my God. And you are my rabbi," who gave me that first opportunity to be like a rabbi. But then Aseh Lecha Rav can also mean make yourself a rabbi, make of yourself a rabbi, be a rabbi. So indeed, I chose the rabbinate influenced deeply by Rabbi Cohen. I chose to go to HUC in Cincinnati because of Rabbi Cohen. I chose to make pursuing social justice the core of my rabbinate and a calling deeply held within my heart because of Rabbi Cohen. I got involved in the Soviet Jewry movement and went as a spy to the former Soviet Union because of Rabbi Cohen. I chose to entertain and teach morality from the Bima, not just like he did with Charlie Brownstein stories, but as I created my own Pac-Man stories to entertain the children and teach a lesson. I chose to put great care into any sermon that I would put together and preach, because he taught me the power of the pulpit and the power of the spoken word. I chose to be a rabbi who cares deeply for the souls of those one serves in the congregation, one's flock, because I learned this firsthand from my rabbi, Rabbi Cohen. But the greatest tribute of all, perhaps, to Rabbi Cohen is his legacy, the Shashelet HaKabbalah, the idea that from generation to generation his spirit will live on, because I am blessed to be able to have not one but two of my three daughters who have chosen the rabbinate. My daughter Ariel, who was going to be ordained almost 10 years, ordained in Cincinnati like Rabbi Cohen and myself, who served at her first pulpit in Dallas, of all places, in Texas, and now is rabbi of Temple Shalom in Naples, Florida. And my daughter Ashira, who is currently at the Hebrew Union College in New York, who, with God's help, will be ordained a rabbi in the year 2025. They, like me, carry on his passion and his qualities of character. Indeed, Rabbi Cohen lives through many of us from generation to generation. We are all the recipients of his spirit. But the greatest quality I admired most about my rabbi was his humility, his modesty, his lack of pretense, his authenticity, his love of humanity, of all humanity. In him there was no guile, only unvarnished truth. In him there were no airs, only a desire to be a servant of the Most High. And so, as the book that Rabbi Cohen wrote, his last, about his grandfather, Rabbi Henry Cohen of Texas, entitled A Kindler of Souls, it is apt indeed, that title, for I can say with immense gratitude to you, Rabbi, with undying love, thank you for setting my soul on fire. Thank you for lighting a fire within my soul. Thank you for being you, for teaching me lessons for life without even knowing that you were teaching them, for your acts of courage and kindness and love. Your physical remains are inconsequential. Your spirit lives within me, and your essence continues to reverberate throughout the world, through all who are blessed to know you. My love for you, my Rabbi, is eternal. May the Holy One receive you with compassion, and may you rest in peace. With undying gratitude and love, Shalom.